So we're on that under the tracks there for, I don't know, 10 or 15 blocks before we get into Jamaica, which is a major hub of Queens. In some ways, perhaps you could call it the hub of Queens.
Yeah,
And Jessie did a bunch of research on it this week when she was at the studio one day.
I did. Yeah, so it is a major hub of Queens. In Jamaica, it's a major transit hub. 10 Long Island Railroad branches converge there. We have been there a number of times when we're going out to visit your family.
Mm-hmm.
13 bus lines meet up in Jamaica, 4 major subways, and 5 adjacent highways. And there's also connection to JFK.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, changing at Jamaica is something that all people from Long Island understand.
absolutely. Yeah. I would think so.
You have to, you just, generally you'd like to avoid doing it because it just takes a little bit extra time. But you look at the railroad schedules and you're like, all right, well, do I have to change at Jamaica or no? And then it's like, okay, well, if I do, I need to know which track I'm on and like, is it going to be there or am I going to miss it?
Yeah. It's wild. I feel like I'm definitely getting used to that, how that works to ride the railroad out to Long Island and change at Jamaica. But it took me a while to understand, like, where do you look? Who do you listen for? Are you going to know what to do? And then there's that trick where you can go through another train. Like, if you have to get to the other track, but there's another train with both its doors open, you can just go through.
Right.
And everyone does it, and I'm like, I feel comfortable
What if I
with
get
it
trapped?
now. Exactly. Like, what if the doors close and I go to Hempstead or something? I don't even know what Hempstead is. Where is that? Where is that in relation to Huntington? What's going to happen? It's kind of just like riding the subway, the New York subway.
Mm-hmm.
You get the rules down and then you know what you're doing. But anyway, we're speaking about Jamaica here. So it's a hub. Planes, trains, automobiles, they're all there. They all meet up there. In 1925, Jamaica became the premier shopping area of all central Queens. And in the 30s, it was considered the financial heart of Queens.
Mm-hmm.
That lasted through till the 60s, and it's only really sort of lost steam because people started moving a little bit further out and into Nassau County.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess as people were living in Long Island and all that transportation expanded further, there wasn't quite as much of a need to do all the shopping and all that stuff in Jamaica. But it still seems to be, there's still a lot of businesses. It still seems like a major commercial area.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to me. The stores there, so there are these department stores in New York, for those that aren't familiar, like Rainbow and Jimmy Jazz, that I think it probably extend to at least other urban areas in the Northeast. I don't know.
We had a Rainbow growing up in Pennsylvania.
You did?
Yeah.
We didn't have a Rainbow. So I don't know how far, if it's national or what. They remind me of, in a funny way, the, again in quotes, department stores that you might find at a beach town.
Yeah, kind
where
of.
like they all sell the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they look like big and impressive on the outside, and then the inside you're like, okay, well this is a store.
Yeah, I mean it's like basic. It's like t-shirts and shoes but it's all pretty like just like cheap and easy and basics.
Yeah, there were a bunch of outfits being advertised for like $3.99.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh dear.
Yeah.
Where was that made? What?
I know. That's it's not being made well.
No.
It's not being made in a good, ethical way.
No.
There's no way that any of that is ethical.
But that strip of Jamaica stores is like the equivalent of Broadway, where I used to work in some ways, where it's like the flagship versions of these stores. Like, I've never really seen bigger versions of these types
Mm.
of stores.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, I wonder if any of them are the actual flagship stores.
Right.
We should look that up.
I don't know if that's like a part of their advertising plan or so, I don't know if it's part of like to have a flagship store where it's
Yeah,
like,
I don't know. I guess, I don't know. We could look it up.
yeah. But I mean, it also just might be that there were other stores here at one time, and then they just, you know, the space is there, and then they took it up.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it made me think a lot about like, is this an okay place for it to be? Like, I mean, does it go to a more advanced state than what this is, or does it need to, or like, what does an improved commercial area look like? You know?
That you mean that does this area continue to grow in some way?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it seems like, I mean, it grew so fast over 100 years ago. So the reason that it's a commercial area is because after the Civil War, the population boomed in Jamaica and they expanded the electric trolley service in 1888, and then they added the elevated train in 1918. And then, like I said, by 1925, it was the premier shopping area. So that was only 7 years from when the elevated train arrived, and then it was the main shopping area in all of Central Queens.
Yeah.
And then that lasted for almost 40 years until the 60s, and now it's been 60 years, right?
Right.
And I'm sure it's changed throughout that time. I mean, yeah, the rainbow definitely wasn't there in the 40s and 50s, and
Yeah. What I'm thinking is the caliber of the buildings does not fit the current stores that are there, as my understanding
right.
is. And so that suggests to me that there's room to grow, but then what does that look like? Like, firstly, a lot of people do their shopping online now. So
Mhm.
like retail, brick and mortar retail is not something that probably is going to resurge, or at least certainly not in the way that we understand it.
Yeah.
And then if that's the case, what I guess the logical version would be, you know, Nikes move in and things like that, and then that would be the highest level that you know, we would think of for that space. That's not something that I'm particularly interested in
Right.
seeing. But then what is, because I think it would be one thing to say like, if it reflected the population that lives there and like
Right.
independently owned stores, then I mean, yeah, like a very simple level that would make sense.
Right.
But the stores
But
are
they're
so
huge.
big
Yeah.
that I don't think there's really a way for that to occur.
Yeah. Well, I think what would be interesting is to find out what the people that live there actually need, not in terms of what they need to buy, but what do they actually need. Like, those stores are huge. They could easily house some sort of industry,
Hmm.
and maybe people that live there need jobs. Could we set up, it could still be fashion related, right? Could we
Mm-hmm.
set up some sort of kind of like what Industry City did in Sunset Park? Could those then
Yeah.
turn into a place where people could work? Since it is a transportation hub as well, could people coming in from Long Island go to work there? Could people from our area go out east a little bit to work?
Yeah.
Could, that it converges there. That could be really interesting. I think when the Starbucks moves in, when the Nikes move in, when those kind of things move in, it's like gentrification that ultimately raises the rents and pushes people out from living there and changes the neighborhood so much. It would be, in my opinion, more interesting to find ways to support the people that are already there and give those buildings some sort of purpose.
Yeah.
And then if you're using that space as a, garment worker space, people would start to understand the value of the labor that goes into making clothing, and then the rainbows would have to get their act together.
Right. Right.
I mean, here we are. We don't need to spend this whole conversation talking about my interests in labor that goes into the fashion industry, but that could be an interesting idea. When I was researching Jamaica, I did not happen to research what it is that a lot of people that live there currently are doing day to day. Or actually, I didn't really research much of what the demographics are even. So
Yeah.
I think to figure out what those spaces could be best used for, someone would have to know that, or
Yeah.
engage with the people that are living there.
Yeah. I think it's worthwhile to talk about the fashion industry in relation to this area, given that the clothing component of our project is a real thing.
Yeah.
And there, we're talking about the area. We don't live there. I mean, it's unclear what percentage of people are satisfied with what's going on there already.
Mm-hmm.
However, if a lot of these stores are based on merchandise that was created in a way that we feel is unethical,
Yeah.
and also, I mean, it's hard to not say objectively unethical.
Oh,
But
yeah.
then it's a question of, well, if that's the case, then I think it is worthwhile and not invalid to think about what it could potentially be,
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it is something that you have to be careful about, the idea of thinking it could be something else if you're not there. But then when you're comparing it with the idea that that area is based on potentially the suffering of lots of other people,
Yeah, I mean, I think as people start to learn about that, it's definitely something that no one wants to support. It's unfortunate that in the fashion industry, there's very little regulation and there's very little transparency. So when you're given the option of shopping at a Rainbow where you can spend $4 on your entire outfit, and if you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of options for where you're getting your clothes. And of course, shopping at a thrift store is always ethical. Well, I guess I shouldn't say always. I shouldn't put a blanket statement on that, because the owner of the thrift store that you're shopping from could be supporting terrible things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about an environmental impact and you're talking about a labor impact of who made the clothes, then shopping at a thrift store is ethical. Shopping secondhand is always ethical because it already exists and you're not forcing more to be produced.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you're buying a t-shirt and it's less than $10, that's not going to be...
The math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that buying meat that's very underpriced doesn't really add up either.
Right.
And it's such an ingrained part of our culture that, we excuse. I mean, it's not even, it's like it goes beyond excuse. It's really, the conversation isn't weighted enough to even say excuse. It's just like a part of the fabric of what
Literally.
we are. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's also just, it's not really, there's an element that's on the consumer. We can boycott, we can use our money to say what we want and how we want people to be treated, but we also aren't given the information. And sometimes boycotting isn't actually the way to do it, because if we as a nation boycott one brand, say we all decide to boycott H&M, then the people that are being employed by H&M, even if they're being employed at a piece price where they're making 2 cents per garment, then they get nothing, right? And it's not that 2 cents per garment is good, and it's not even like, well, it's better than nothing, but it is better than nothing, and it doesn't actually solve the problem. The problem is that these people need to be paid a living wage, and people need to not be treated like that, and the labor needs to be fair. So instead of boycotting, it is important to sort of call out, right? But then that means that we need the information in order to call it out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's complicated. It's like a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not even, it's like beyond a lot of work. A lot of this stuff just is impossible to find.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I mean, as far as just having fun about the idea of what that strip could grow into, the idea of the like industry city-esque thing where it
Yeah.
becomes a hub for some type of industry is a fun thing to think about.
Yeah.
It's a little more complicated than the industry city thing in that like you'd have to acquire all of those buildings rather than like just freshly build them yourself, you know.
Well, industry city buildings were industry buildings.
But
They were
weren't
already warehouses, and
but
they
they
were
weren't
already
being used for the same
right.
type of thing where it's like that section of Jamaica is culturally like important to that
Yes,
area
yeah.
currently, you know. It involves sweat, labor, clothing, and like a lot of stuff that's kind of dubious, but it is definitely a part of the fabric of that. Whereas the warehouses, they may have been storing things, or
Right, but no, they were like out, not being
yeah.
used
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's a cool idea. You also looked up what Jamaica means, right?
I did, yeah. So I mean, anytime you ride the J train, you see that you can either go towards Broad Street or you can go towards Jamaica, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the winter, I'll see, oh, I could go to Jamaica. And a lot of times I'm like, oh, I wish it was really Jamaica and I could just take the train to some warm island. But it turns out that Jamaica Queens has nothing to do with Jamaica, the island in the Caribbean. Jamaica Queens is named after the Algonquin nation that was living there. It was named Jamaica, and I might be butchering that a little bit. And what it meant in Algonquin was beaver.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there were a lot of beavers out there. And when the British came and settled it, they named it Jamaica. But in between, before the British got here, the Dutch were here, and they called it Roosdorp, which meant rest town. Yeah, it's an interesting little, like, the colonists came and restored the name, like taking over the area. They still colonized it, but like they restored the name. I don't know. I find that like it's just an interesting little fact.
So the two locations have nothing to do with each other, but they're both taken from native phrases that were very similar for some reason.
Yeah, but Jamaica in the Caribbean did not mean beaver. It meant land of wood and water.
Yeah.
And it was inhabited by the Arawak tribes
prior
to the arrival of Columbus.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's crazy that two different native peoples had a word that was remarkably similar.
I know. I don't know. I mean, I would love to figure out like exactly how it was pronounced. The spelling is different on the internet, but I also don't, the spelling it's English spelling. The way that they're spelling the Jamaica and Queens was Yamecah. And then the way that the internet is spelling the original spelling of Jamaica, the island, is Xaymaca.
Hmm.
So.
There you go.